My name is Catherine, and I'm 26 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I knew my family. I thought love meant accepting whatever they did to me. I thought loyalty meant silence, even when that silence was slowly destroying my soul. I was wrong about everything. The basement door slammed shut above me with a sound that still echoes in my nightmares. The click of the lock felt like a death sentence. But in that moment, trapped in the darkness below my childhood home, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and started recording. What happened next exposed 26 years of lies, manipulation, and abuse that ran so deep through my family tree that I wondered if I'd ever truly known any of them at all. The footage from those 3 days would eventually be played in a courtroom, revealing secrets that my family had buried for decades. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up in the Morrison household meant walking on eggshells every single day. My mother, Linda, ruled our home with an iron fist wrapped in the velvet glove of religious righteousness. She had this way of making you feel like the most loved person in the world 1 minute, then completely worthless the next. Dad was different. Quiet, gentle Thomas Morrison worked double shifts at the factory to avoid being home. When he was there, he'd disappear into his workshop in the garage, emerging only for meals where we'd eat in tense silence. My older brother Marcus was Mom's golden child. At 28, he still lived in our childhood bedroom, working part-time jobs that never seemed to last. But Marcus could do no wrong in Linda's eyes. He was her precious boy, her success story, despite the fact that he'd never held a job for more than 6 months. Then there was my younger sister, Bethany. 23 and pregnant with her second child, she lived in the converted attic with her boyfriend, Jake. Bethany had inherited Mom's sharp tongue and judgmental nature, but she wielded it with the cruelty that only comes from someone who's never been held accountable for anything. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. The catalyst for everything that happened came 2 weeks before my 26th birthday. I had finally saved enough money to put a down payment on a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom place above a bakery. But it was mine. My ticket to freedom. I made the mistake of telling them over Sunday dinner. "You're abandoning your family," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular tone that made my stomach clench. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Marcus slammed his fork down. Typical Catherine. Always thinking, "You're better than the rest of us." "That's not what this is about," I tried to explain. "I just need some space to figure out who I am outside of this house." "Who you are." Bethany laughed bitterly. "You're nothing without this family. You'll come crawling back within a month." Dad said nothing, just pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate like he always did when conflict arose. The argument that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had before. Voices raised, accusations flying, years of resentment finally bubbling to the surface. In the end, Mom delivered her ultimatum with the cold precision of a surgeon. "If you walk out that door to live in that apartment, you're dead to this family. We will not support this selfish decision." I should have left that night. Should have packed my bags and walked away from their toxic love forever. But fear is a powerful thing, especially when it's been carefully cultivated over decades. Instead, I stayed, and I agreed to their compromise. They wanted me to prove my commitment to the family, show them that I could be trusted, that I wasn't going to abandon them like my older sister Rebecca had 5 years earlier. Rebecca, the sister we weren't allowed to talk about, the one whose pictures had been removed from every family album, the ghost who haunted our dinner table, with her absence. The compromise was simple, they said. I would spend 3 days in the basement. A meditation retreat, Mom called it. Time to reflect on what family really meant. Time to choose between my selfish desires and the people who had raised me. Looking back, I realized that nothing about their plan was spontaneous. The basement had been prepared. There was a cot, some water, a bucket for a bathroom. They had been planning this intervention for weeks. The last thing I saw before the door closed was Mom's face, twisted with what she probably thought was righteous love. This is for your own good, Catherine. You'll thank us when you come to your senses. The lock clicked. The footsteps faded. And I was alone in the darkness with nothing but my thoughts and the small camera hidden in my phone. To understand why I stayed silent for so long, you need to know about Rebecca. My older sister was everything I wanted to be. Confident, independent, unafraid to speak her mind. She was also everything my mother feared most. Rebecca left on a Tuesday morning when I was 18. No goodbye, no explanation to the family. Just a note that said she couldn't pretend anymore. For weeks afterward, Mom would find excuses to go into Rebecca's room, standing there for long minutes before closing the door again. Within a month, it was like Rebecca had never existed at all. She chose her path, Mom would say whenever someone asked. We choose ours. But late at night, I'd catch Dad staring at Rebecca's senior photo on his nightstand, the one he'd hidden from Mom's purge. His eyes would be red-rimmed, and he'd quickly put the picture face down when he saw me watching. The unspoken rule became clear. Leaving the family meant ceasing to exist. The threat was always there, hovering over every conversation, every decision, every moment of doubt. Growing up, our house felt like a stage where we were all performing roles that had been assigned to us before we were old enough to audition. Marcus was the struggling son who needed constant support and encouragement. Bethany was the family beauty who could charm her way out of any situation. I was the responsible one, the mediator, the one who kept everyone else's secrets. And Mom was the director, orchestrating our lives with a combination of guilt, manipulation, and just enough genuine affection to keep us believing that this was what love looked like. Dad was more like a supporting actor who'd forgotten most of his lines. He went through the motions of family life, showing up for birthdays, helping with homework, fixing things around the house. But there was always this sense that part of him was somewhere else entirely. I later learned that the somewhere else was his weekly visits to Rebecca's apartment, carefully hidden from the rest of us. He'd been maintaining a relationship with his banished daughter for 5 years, living a double life that would have shattered Mom's carefully constructed narrative if she'd ever found out. The Morrison family had rules that were never spoken but always understood. Never air dirty laundry in public. Never question Mom's decisions. Never show weakness that might reflect poorly on the family image. And never, ever abandon the people who raised you. Marcus had internalized these rules so completely that he'd become Mom's enforcer. Anytime one of us stepped out of line, Marcus would appear with his lectures about family loyalty and gratitude. He had this way of making you feel guilty for wanting anything that didn't serve the collective Morrison good. Catherine's always been selfish, he'd tell Mom whenever I expressed any desire for independence. Remember when she wanted to go away to college? Thank God you talked sense into her. Bethany was different. She'd learned to navigate Mom's moods like a sailor reading dangerous waters. She could sense exactly when to be charming, when to be helpless, when to deflect attention onto someone else. Her pregnancy had only amplified these skills. Now she was carrying the next generation of Morrisons, making her temporarily untouchable. But I saw through her act sometimes. Late at night when we'd run into each other in the kitchen, I'd catch glimpses of the person she might have been if she hadn't learned to weaponize vulnerability. Those moments never lasted long before her armor snapped back into place. The house itself seemed to absorb our dysfunction. Every room held memories of arguments that ended with someone being punished, celebrations that felt performative, and silences that stretched for days. The basement where I'd eventually be imprisoned had always felt ominous to me, even as a child. It was where Mom sent us when we needed to think about what we'd done. Where Marcus would retreat when his latest job fell through and he couldn't face the disappointment in her eyes. Where I'd found Dad crying the night Rebecca left, surrounded by boxes of her things that he couldn't bring himself to throw away. Have you ever lived in a house where love felt conditional? Where every gesture of affection came with invisible strings attached? That was my normal for 26 years. The apartment I'd found represented more than just independence. It was proof that a different life was possible. A life where I could make decisions based on what I wanted, not what everyone else needed from me. A life where love didn't require me to sacrifice pieces of myself until there was nothing left. But first, I had to survive 3 days in the basement with nothing but my thoughts, and the growing realization that my family's love had always been a cage disguised as protection. The recording light on my phone glowed red in the darkness. Whatever happened next, there would finally be a witness to the truth. The first few hours in the basement were the hardest, not because of the physical discomfort, but because of the voices in my head. Mom's voice telling me I was ungrateful. Marcus reminding me that family comes first. Bethany laughing at my dreams of independence. I'd been programmed to doubt myself for so long that even locked in a basement, part of me wondered if they were right. But then I started recording. Day 1, hour 3, I whispered to my phone camera. I'm locked in the basement of my childhood home because I wanted to move into my own apartment. This is what love looks like in the Morrison family. Speaking the words out loud made something shift inside me. The fog of gaslighting that had clouded my judgment for decades began to clear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't love. This was control disguised as care. Above me, I could hear the family going about their normal routine. Mom's footsteps in the kitchen as she prepared dinner. The television in the living room where Marcus was probably watching his sports highlights. Bethany's voice on the phone, talking to one of her friends about weekend plans. Life continued as if I didn't exist. As if my absence was already being erased from their daily narrative. On my phone, I found Rebecca's number. The one I'd memorized but never dared to call. With shaking fingers, I sent her a text. I'm locked in the basement. They want me to choose between family and freedom. I think I understand now why you left. Her response came within minutes. Catherine? Oh my God. Are you safe? Do you need me to call the police? For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't alone. Rebecca and I texted for hours. She told me about her life, about the therapy she'd needed to overcome the psychological damage of our upbringing. She told me about Dad's secret visits, about how he'd been trying to work up the courage to leave Mom for years, but couldn't bring himself to abandon his children. Dad's been coming to see me every Tuesday for 5 years, she wrote. He brings pictures of you and updates about your life. He's been so worried about you, Catherine. He sees what's happening, but he doesn't know how to stop it. She also told me about Mom's history. Things I'd never known. Stories that Dad had shared during his visits. How Mom had grown up in an abusive household where love was earned through compliance. How she'd married Dad as an escape, only to recreate the same toxic patterns with her own children. Understanding doesn't excuse her behavior, Rebecca typed, but it explains why she can't see that she's destroying the people she claims to love. The second day brought new revelations. I could hear conversations more clearly now that I'd learned to listen beyond the family performance. Marcus arguing with someone on the phone about money. Apparently he owed rent to Mom that he couldn't pay. Bethany crying in the bathroom, on the phone with someone who wasn't Jake. And Mom talking to someone I couldn't identify. She'll come around. They always do when they realize how much they need us. That phrase sent chills down my spine. They always do. How many times had this happened before? How many family members had been subjected to this psychological torture until they broke? I started documenting everything. Every conversation I could hear, every revelation Rebecca shared, every moment of clarity that pierced through years of manufactured confusion. The video files on my phone grew longer as I spoke directly to the camera, creating a record of what was happening. Day 2, evening, I recorded. I can hear Bethany crying upstairs. Marcus is arguing about money. Again. Mom is on the phone talking about breaking people until they submit. And Dad. Dad hasn't said a single word about where I am. Not one word in defense of his daughter who's been locked in a basement for 2 days. But that wasn't entirely true. On the second night, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, hesitant steps that stopped just outside the door. Catherine. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, Dad. Are you okay? The question hung in the air between us. Was I okay? Was any of this okay? Did he really not know the answer? No, Dad. I'm not okay. None of this is okay. Silence stretched for long minutes. I thought he'd left until I heard his voice again, heavy with years of regret. I should have stopped this. Should have stopped it years ago. It's not too late, I whispered back. But his footsteps retreated up the stairs, leaving me alone with the weight of his admission and the growing certainty that saving myself would require more courage than I'd ever needed before. The third day would change everything. The third morning brought voices I didn't recognize. Multiple people talking in hushed tones in the kitchen above. I pressed my ear to the ceiling, trying to make sense of the conversation fragments drifting down through the old house's thin floors. Social services called? A woman's voice said. Someone reported a wellness check concern. My heart stopped. Rebecca had kept her word. There's been a misunderstanding. Mom's voice carried that particular tone she used when talking to authority. Figures. Smooth, reasonable, slightly wounded. Catherine is visiting relatives out of state. Ma'am, we need to see Catherine Morrison or we'll need to involve law enforcement. I heard chairs scraping against the kitchen floor. Hushed arguments. Marcus's voice getting louder before Mom shushed him sharply. This was my moment. After 3 days of psychological torture, after 26 years of manufactured guilt and conditional love, I finally had witnesses. I started recording again, making sure to capture the timestamp, then began pounding on the basement door. I'm down here, I shouted as loud as I could. I'm Catherine Morrison and I'm locked in the basement. The voices upstairs went completely silent. Then chaos erupted. Multiple sets of footsteps running toward the basement door. Mom's voice, no longer smooth and controlled, screaming at me to shut up. Marcus yelling something about family loyalty that I couldn't make out over the noise. The lock clicked, and the door flew open. Light flooded the basement as 2 social workers and a police officer stared down at me in shock. Behind them, I could see my family's faces. Mom's twisted with rage, Marcus looking panicked, Bethany pale and wide-eyed. But it was Dad's expression that broke my heart. Relief, shame, and something that looked like pride all mixed together as he met my eyes. Ma'am, how long have you been down there? The female social worker was already coming down the stairs, her professional demeanor barely concealing her horror. 3 days, I said, holding up my phone where the recording light was still blinking. and I have video documentation of everything. What happened next felt like watching a carefully constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Mom tried to explain that this was a family intervention to help me with my mental health issues. Marcus backed her up, talking about how I'd been acting erratically and needed professional help. But the evidence was undeniable. The makeshift prison they'd created in the basement, the bucket they'd left for me to use as a bathroom, the recordings on my phone that captured their conversations about breaking my will. The police officer's face grew darker with each detail. "Ma'am, you and your son are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment and psychological abuse." "You can't arrest me for loving my daughter," Mom screamed as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "She's destroying this family. She's just like Rebecca, selfish and ungrateful." And there it was, the truth she'd never admitted before. Rebecca hadn't abandoned us. She'd escaped. And Mom had never forgiven her for having the courage to leave. As they led Mom and Marcus away, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete clarity. The fog of gaslighting and manipulation that had clouded my judgment for decades was finally gone. Bethany approached me as the social workers finished their initial assessment. Her face was streaked with tears, but for the first time in years, she looked genuinely vulnerable instead of performatively helpless. "Catherine, I didn't know they would actually lock you up. I thought they were just trying to scare you. You helped them plan this, didn't you?" I asked quietly. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom said it was the only way to save the family, that you were going to abandon us like Rebecca did." "Rebecca didn't abandon anyone, Bethany. She saved herself. Just like I'm doing now." Dad stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the police car drive away with his wife and son. When he turned to look at me, I saw a man who'd spent decades enabling abuse out of his own fear and weakness. "Catherine, he started. "Not now, Dad. Maybe not ever. But definitely not now." The social worker handed me a card with resources for abuse survivors. The police officer explained that I'd need to come to the station to give a full statement. There would be court dates, testimony, evidence hearings. But for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was finally free to write my own story. If you've made it this far in my story, please hit that like button. Your support means everything to survivors sharing their truth. The apartment across town was still waiting for me. My new life was about to begin. The legal proceedings took 8 months. 8 months of court dates, testimonies, and facing my family across a crowded courtroom while evidence of their psychological abuse was presented to strangers who would decide their fate. The videos I'd recorded in the basement became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Hours of footage showing my deteriorating mental state, the conversations I'd overheard, and the systematic way my family had tried to break down my will to choose independence. Mom and Marcus were sentenced to 18 months in prison for unlawful imprisonment and psychological abuse. The judge called their actions a calculated attempt to destroy another person's autonomy through isolation and emotional torture. Watching them led away in handcuffs should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like mourning. I was grieving the family I'd always hoped we could be, while finally accepting the family we actually were. Dad testified on my behalf, admitting to years of enabling behavior and his own cowardice in failing to protect his children. He moved into a small apartment downtown after Mom's sentencing, finally leaving the house that had harbored so much dysfunction. Bethany surprised everyone, including herself, by entering therapy and testifying about the toxic family dynamics she'd witnessed growing up. Her pregnancy had given her perspective on what healthy family relationships should look like. She didn't want to repeat the cycle with her own children. I spent so long being scared of Mom's disapproval that I forgot how to think for myself. She told me during one of our supervised visits, "Seeing you stand up to all of us, it showed me what courage actually looks like." The apartment above the bakery became my sanctuary. Every morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh bread, instead of the tension that had permeated our family home. I could make decisions about what to eat, when to sleep, how to spend my time, without consulting anyone else or managing anyone else's emotions. Freedom, I discovered, was both exhilarating and terrifying. After 26 years of having my choices made for me, I had to learn how to trust my own judgment. Therapy helped, but mostly it was just practice. Making small decisions every day until I remembered who I was underneath all the programming. Rebecca and I built a relationship. That felt nothing like the performative family bonds I'd grown up with. She became my guide through the process of healing, sharing resources and strategies that had helped her rebuild her life after leaving home. The hardest part, she told me over coffee 6 months after the trial, isn't escaping the dysfunction. It's learning to recognize healthy relationships when you find them. She was right. I'd been so conditioned to expect love with conditions, manipulation disguised as care, and guilt as a tool of control, that genuine kindness felt suspicious at first. My therapist helped me understand that this hypervigilance was normal for abuse survivors. "Your family taught you that love was earned through compliance," she explained. "Now you get to learn what unconditional acceptance actually feels like." The bakery owners, Maria and Giuseppe, became like surrogate parents. They never asked about my family situation or why I'd moved in so suddenly. They just welcomed me into their daily routine, sharing meals and stories and creating the kind of warm, stable environment I'd never experienced. Work became another form of healing. I got a job at a nonprofit that helped domestic violence survivors find housing and legal support. Using my experience to help others gave purpose to the pain I'd endured. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life from scratch? It's harder than movies make it look, but also more rewarding than I ever imagined possible. 1 year after my imprisonment, I received a letter from Mom in prison. 5 pages of the same manipulation and guilt tripping that had controlled me for decades, disguised as an apology. She wanted me to visit her, to forgive her, to restore our relationship when she was released. I read it once, then threw it away. Some bridges are meant to be burned. Dad and I maintained cautious contact. We met for coffee every few weeks, slowly building something that resembled a healthy father-daughter relationship. He was doing his own therapeutic work, finally confronting the ways his passivity had enabled years of abuse. "I failed you," he said during one of our conversations. "I knew what was happening and I chose to protect myself instead of protecting my children." His accountability meant something, even though it couldn't undo the damage. We were both learning that healing doesn't erase the past, but it can change how that past shapes your future. The woman I became over that year was someone I didn't recognize at first. Confident, independent, unafraid to set boundaries or speak her truth. It was like meeting myself for the first time at 27 years old. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting in my own apartment, running a support group for family abuse survivors, I would never have believed them. The Catherine from 3 years ago was still convinced that love meant accepting whatever treatment people gave you in the name of family loyalty. Today, I know better. My support group meets every Thursday evening in the community center downtown. 12 people, ranging from teenagers to senior citizens, all learning to navigate the complex process of healing from family trauma. Some have cut contact completely. Others are working toward healthier boundaries with reformed family members. There's no right way to heal, only your way. Last month, a young woman named Sarah joined our group. She reminded me so much of myself at 18. Anxious, guilt-ridden, convinced that wanting independence made her selfish and ungrateful. Her family had been using financial control and emotional manipulation to keep her from attending college, out of state. "But they love me," she kept saying. "They just worry about me being so far away." I handed her a piece of paper with a simple question written on it. "If someone you loved wanted to pursue their dreams, would you try to stop them?" The look of recognition in her eyes was identical to the one I'd had in that basement 3 years ago. The moment when the fog finally clears and you see the situation for what it really is. Rebecca visits every few months now. She lives 2 states away with her husband and daughter. But we maintain the kind of honest, supportive relationship I never knew was possible between siblings. She's become the sister I always needed, but never had. "You saved me too," she told me last Christmas. "Seeing you stand up to them gave me permission to stop feeling guilty for leaving. You proved that we weren't the problem. Dad and I have built something new from the ruins of our old relationship. It's not perfect, and probably never will be, but it's honest." He babysits for Rebecca's daughter when she visits, finally getting to be the grandfather he couldn't be as a father. He's learning that love doesn't require sacrificing yourself or enabling others' dysfunction. Bethany and I text occasionally. She's raising her kids with an awareness of healthy boundaries that she never experienced growing up. Her oldest son is 4 now, and she tells me he's already showing signs of the independence that our family would have tried to crush. "I want him to know he can trust his own judgment," she wrote in her last message. "I want him to know that love doesn't come with conditions." Mom and Marcus were released from prison last year. Mom moved in with her sister in another state, still convinced that she was the victim in our family story. Marcus lives in a halfway house and works at a grocery store. Neither has attempted to contact me, which is probably for the best. I don't wish them harm, but I also don't owe them forgiveness or reconciliation. Some relationships are too toxic to salvage, no matter how many DNA strands you share. The most important lesson I've learned is that family isn't just about blood, relations. It's about the people who support your growth, celebrate your victories, and love you without trying to control you. My chosen family includes Rebecca, Dad, Maria, and Giuseppe from the bakery, my support group members, and the colleagues who've become friends. These relationships are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the understanding that love means wanting the best for someone, even if that best thing takes them away from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences is the first step toward healing. If my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. I share resources for abuse survivors, updates on my healing journey, and interviews with experts in family trauma recovery. Your support helps me continue this work and reach other people who might need to hear these messages. And if you're currently in a situation where family members are trying to control your life choices through guilt, manipulation, or isolation, please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships that celebrate your autonomy rather than fear it. You deserve love that doesn't require you to sacrifice pieces of yourself. The basement that was meant to break me became the birthplace of my freedom. Sometimes our darkest moments become the foundation for our brightest futures. What would you do if you found yourself locked in a basement by the people who claim to love you? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video if my story helped you see your own situation more clearly. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story matters too.